Good morning to you all. I wish you a very warm welcome to Orgalim Policy Exchange webinar on the new eco-design for sustainable products regulation called the ESPR and digital product passports called DPPs. I'm Stephanie Mittelam and I'm the manager for the green transition at Orgalim. It is a real pleasure as well as a great honor for me to moderate today's event. I have two good news for you. The first one is that today is the first day of spring, which is the season of happiness, hope, and new beginnings. The second good news is that this morning we will have the pleasure to hear a very interesting policy exchange on sustainable products and digital product passports. ESPR is one of the top priorities for Orgalim members who are very active and proactive on circular economy and on this very important ESPR legislation since exactly 4 years now, which was in March 2020 when the European Commission published its new Circular Economy Action Plan. Orgalim members are very committed and serious about circular economy. One example is that we have 40 active members in Orgalim Green Transition Working Group meeting several times per month since 4 years. Today's event is an absolute record in the history of Orgalim Policy Exchanges webinars because we have received more than 1,000 registrations, 1,046 until this morning to be very precise. This shows the importance of this new ESPR for Europe's technology industries. Before we start, some logistical information. The event is recorded and all attendees are muted. You will receive an email early next week with the links to access the recording of the event, the presentations, as well as the Orgalim views and recommendations. Due to the extremely high number of participants, we are sorry, unfortunately, the chat functionality is not available. However, there will be a Q&A session at the end of our webinar based on the questions we receive from participants ahead the event. You will find in the handout sections of this GoToWebinar system a copy of the agenda, the bios from the speakers, and the text of the final draft new eco-design for sustainable product regulation. My communication colleagues are covering our event on social media channels. You see the links on this slide. Please don't hesitate to promote the event on social media. Thank you. Before presenting the agenda of our policy exchange today, I will briefly introduce you to Orgalim. Orgalim is a European association representing Europe's technology industries comprised of many companies, more than 770 innovative companies spanning the mechanical engineering, electrical engineering and electronics, ICT, and metal technology branches. Our industries provide innovative technology solutions which are underpinning the twin green and digital transitions. Europe's technology industries represent the EU's largest manufacturing sector, generating annual turnover of 2.8 billion, manufacturing 1/3 of all European exports and providing nearly 12 million direct jobs. Orgalim has 3 different types of members: national industry associations, European sector associations, and also corporate companies. In case you would be interested to have more information about Orgalim membership, please don't hesitate to contact my very nice communication colleagues. On this next slide, you will now see the list of Orgalim members. We have 48 member associations, whether they are national associations or sector associations. We have 10 corporate members, and all this in 21 countries. Now we'll introduce you to the agenda of our policy exchange today. We will start our event with the first keynote speaker from the European Commission, with Mr. Matthias Schmalgei, is the head of unit on sustainable products in DG Environment. He will present us the new eco-design for sustainable products regulation. We are very lucky because we will then have a second keynote speaker from the European Commission, Mr. Michele Galatola, Senior Policy Officer and DG Grow, and he will zoom in on the digital product passport. After the 2 presentations from the European Commission, we will hear the views from Orgalim as well as our concrete recommendations to policymakers, presented by the leadership of Orgalim Green Transition Working Group, Louise Bühnemann, she's the chair of our working group from the Confederation of Danish Industries, as well as Ulrike Witz, the vice chair of our Orgalim Green Transition Working Group from the Association of Metal Technology Industries in Austria. Last but not least, we will conclude the presentations with hearing the results of the very interesting CIRPAS project that will be presented by Caroline Bernier with the CIRPAS Consortium Coordinator. We will then have a Q&A session and we will conclude our event. Now we would be interested to know, we will do an online poll to know who you represent. Here are the possible answers. Sorry, we will launch the online poll. Thank you, Blandine. So we would like to hear from you whether you represent a national association, a European association, a company, a policymaker, a public authority, or another category. Click on whether you are a national association, European association, company, policymaker / public authority, or other. Thank you. And we will very soon close the poll and continue. We are waiting for the result. Ta-da-da. So as expected, the vast majority is companies. We have 60% of attendees being companies, 13% being national association, 13% being European association, 1% policymakers, and 9% other. Thank you. I'm very happy that so many companies and industry representatives are attending our event today because the objective of our policy exchange is precisely to raise awareness to companies about the new requirements for sustainable products and digital product passport. I would like to warmly thank Orgalim National Member Association colleagues who invited so actively their member companies to join our policy exchange today. A warm welcome to all the companies and in particular to Orgalim corporate members. And of course, again, a very warm welcome to you attending our event today. We will now start officially our policy exchange, and I'm very happy to now pass the floor to our first keynote speaker from the European Commission. Matthias Schmalgaj is Head of Unit on Sustainable Products in DG Environment, but even more important, is the coordinator of the Sustainable Products Initiative for all DGs in the European Commission. I would like to warmly thank Matthias for the excellent cross-DGs coordination he's doing in the European Commission on ESPR, because it's really important that the different DGs speak with one voice, which is not always the case on all files. So it's really good news on ESPR. We are very lucky. Thank you very much, Matthias.
First, I'd like to hear my thanks, but still she's done a wonderful job with her colleagues in organizing this. Second thing I wanted to say is that we here at the European Commission really enjoyed working with Orgalim and actually with all stakeholders. We made an extra effort to really stay engaged with different associations and companies throughout the preparation of the Sustainable Products Regulation. We think it is fantastically important we work together, so we'll continue to do so. Now, I'll move in basically presenting what we're doing, what can you expect from it, and also giving some practical details. But first, just a reminder that why we're actually doing this. As you know, the Sustainable Products Initiative was part of the Commission's Green Deal, and more specifically, one of the key pillars of the Circular Economy Action Plan. And the main reasons we are doing this are basically threefold. One, global trends, and Europeans part in those global trends in terms of resource use, resource destruction, and impacts that resource use has on greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental aspects such as biodiversity, water, air quality, and so on. are negative, are very negative, and actually, despite all the policy action that's been taking place, those trends are very slowly moving in the right direction. That's why for a long time it's been considered that if we can do something meaningful to basically accelerate the economic transition and to sort of harness the role of innovation in making our consumption more sustainable, that would be a great contribution to what we're doing. And this, I think, is the main reason that we went ahead with this proposal. On the slide, you just see a couple of sort of key benefits that we're hoping for. On all the figures, we'll have better figures when we move down the implementation, when we do further studies, when we actually start working on the products. But our consultation, all the work that was done so far, and our impact assessment had already shown us some of the really great contributions um, that that there is, that the potential of this regulation brings. And those would be, I think, a couple of strengths. Of one is actually positive environmental impacts from making products more sustainable, for making them more durable, also addressing the consumer's wish and need to move in this direction. But also, on the other hand, an economic opportunity that this brings to the companies, to European companies, and some of the tools we can use to actually help to enhance this benefit. For example, the regulation foresees that green public procurement could accompany the measures on products. So we could be unlocking big public markets and therefore helping you to accelerate the economies of scale, and also ensuring that there is a business case for what we're doing. And finally, Europe is resource dependent, and if we contribute to keeping more resources in the economy, we reduce our sort of outside dependencies and increase our resilience, economic and otherwise. You can move on to the next slide. So now I understood from Stephanie and her colleagues that this is a really important part to be very clear what's happening when. So Commission started working on this several years ago. For the last 2 years, there has been negotiation on the regulation with between the co-legislators, the European Council representing the member states, and European Parliament, with Commission facilitating this. And at the end of the last year, we came to political agreement. Work on technical level to sort of fix all the nooks and crannies has been going on, and it's just been finished by our legal colleagues. There will be vote on 25th of April in the Parliament, confirming the last text, and there will be final endorsement by the Council in May, so in a couple of months from now. We expect this to happen, but these are formal steps that do need to take place before we can be really 100% sure. But our expectation is everything is going to go fine. This means that roughly sometime, probably end of May or beginning of June, mid-June at the latest, the regulation will be published, and then very shortly after that, it will enter into force. That means that all the legal deadlines that are foreseen there start ticking. However, there is very little or almost nothing of direct impact on any of the economic operators at that stage, because several other things have to happen before real change in what affects you, and then eventually what affects the products being placed on the market will happen. And I'll explain those now. So there are two things that the Commission needs to do before the work with the outside world will really start formally in earnest. So first thing is we have to set up the Eco Design Forum. I'll explain more about this forum a bit later, but in principle, this is a platform which allows us to work with all the stakeholders, the companies, associations, trade unions, civil society, and also member states, and basically have almost a co-creation process of our regulation. So it's a structured, permanent consultation body. Second thing that has to happen, which again should be of a lot of interest to you, is that the Commission, 9 months after entering into force, so given this timeline, we're considering sometime around this time next year, the Commission will adopt the working plan. This will be a minimum 3 to maybe 5 years program that will actually explain which are the products and horizontal measures on which the Commission intends to make proposals. So this will really very transparently, with the timelines on when the work starts and when it should finish, show what we are planning to do in the next 5 years. Excuse me. Then there are several other things that will happen, and I'll explain all these in more detail later on. But there has to be some horizontal things that have to happen before we can actually adopt first measures. So one block of these is all the preparations, the so-called implementing acts that we have to do, that the actual ban on destruction of goods, which was a small but important part of this regulation agreed by the co-legislators, kicks into force. So that is expected sometime by the mid of next year. And something which you'll hear a lot about from my colleague Michele later on, we need to set all the preparatory steps so that the digital product passport can then be accompanying different measures. So the next thing after this will be adoption of the first measures. Products that were included in the working program will be worked on, and usually it takes at the minimum 2, but more likely 2.5 up to 3 years before the start of the work and before the adoption. This is mainly because there is extensive consultation and a lot of evidence gathering work. There's a preparatory study, there's impact assessment. So what we can expect is at the very earliest, at the end of 25 or at the beginning of 26, there could be adoption of the first delegated acts. And this is actually going only to apply for 1 or 2 products, because we already started working on them based on a mandate that we were given even before the conclusion of the regulation, and that was a textile strategy, which was adopted by the Commission and endorsed by Council and the Parliament, and said that textiles are the #1 priority product, so we should start work already. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So just to quickly recap, we will have the framework legislation, which doesn't actually, apart from ban on destruction of 2 categories of goods, have no direct impacts. Then we will adopt a working program, which will explain which of the products we'll be working on. And again, we were consulting and will be consulting on this. And then finally, there is adoption of specific measures. We can move on to the next slide, please. Now I'll explain a little bit how the regulation works. So the scope is broad. Those of you who are familiar with current eco design will know that it was focused on energy-related products. Now we have very wide scope, which doesn't mean we will be regulating all products under the world, but it means that based on analysis of importance, we basically have to look at most of the market, excluding food and several very small limited categories. Second thing that is out there is that focus of the last 20 years had been largely on energy efficiency of products, with recent years seeing increasingly also adding aspects such as durability or recyclability, and this becomes much more emphasized now. So again, we're not doing, as I'll explain, everything on every product, but we have to look at all the aspects, which includes different categories of durability, repairability, making things easier to recycle, reuse, and so on. Another novelty is that we have legal possibility to also adopt horizontal measures, which would cut across several product categories. I'll say a few words about that later on. And finally, you'll hear much more about the digital product passport afterwards. If you can move on, please. So just to be, just to be a little bit more specific, you are seeing them on the screen. I'm not going to read out. but basically three categories of things we're looking on in addition to energy efficiency. We're looking at how to make products more efficient, if you want, how to reduce environmental impacts that it has, and also through the life cycle. So that's very important. And also how to make products more lasting longer, if you want. There's a number of things, number of ilities, as I call them, that we do. If we can move on to the next one. Uh, just a few words on horizontal measures. This will really be new avenue. We will approach it very carefully. It was introduced because it is considered that could be an approach where we can actually save time and fix a couple of very important sort of cross-cutting categories in a range of products, but there have to be several conditions. These products have to be similar enough to be able to do meaningful measures. And what we have in our sites, there was preliminary studies on already that are all available to be and public. We are looking at issues such as repairability, recycled content, and we'll be looking probably in the first one or two measures to really very carefully weigh how to test this, so we don't approach this with a too broad brush and then have big problems in implementation. We can move on, please. There are several additional tools, and I'll mention two that are explicitly there to make the transition faster and more easy especially for the producers side. And also the seller side. So one is mandatory green public procurement, where for those products that are substantially bought also by public authorities, we can and probably will also adopt compulsory green public procurement measures, and then make sure that percentages of products purchased are those that are meeting high requirements. And through this, we want to basically create lead markets and make the sort of economic cost, the economies of scale cheaper for making it easier to meet the higher requirements. On the other side, we see very strong need to keep ensuring or improve the level playing field, and therefore make sure that those of you who are selling in Europe should all be respecting the rules, but should also be sure that public authorities are catching those who are not, including the imports. So there's quite substantial emphasis on this side of the work, which is largely in the hands of member states, but we're very committed to work with them and make sure they deliver. And then finally, something that co-legislators decided to introduce also, destruction of unsold goods, which Commission had originally foreseen starting with transparency requirements, so basically gathering information, but it's then been decided that there is enough evidence to already prohibit destructing textiles and to focus on also doing so in near future in 2 years if we gather enough evidence on ICT products. We can move on to the next slide, please. So again, just to go a little bit back, you remember in the timeline I said the working plan will be adopted sometime around the same time as now next year. This is when the Commission will continue or start working in earnest on the first selected number of products and horizontal measures. This work includes launching of a preparatory study in accordance with the predefined methodology that includes at the beginning socioeconomic studies, understanding the market, understanding the technologies that are there, and then defining, looking at the negative impacts that could be improved, looking at technological feasibility, and then setting sort of the, through impact assessment, seeing which of the things I explained before would be necessary and can be done, and what is the sort of level of performance improvements that we are looking at. We could also be looking at information requirements only. So for example, we could see that parts of the supply chain or the consumers or both would really benefit from more clarity on certain aspects of products in information form, and so that's also something that we can do. Then the proposals go to the Eco Design Forum, where they're discussed by all stakeholders. We get the feedback throughout the preparatory study and impact assessment. We will have already consulted all the relevant stakeholders, gathering evidence and so on, but this would then be sort of presenting what we did with all those consultations. And then we have to take into account the feedback that we get from different categories of stakeholders and member states. And then we adopt the measure. Not to bore you, it's something that's called delegated act. It basically means Commission adopts it, but then the member states in the Council and the Parliament look at it, and if a larger number of them actually disagrees with what we've done, they can reject it. But for that, that really has to be something that a lot of them doesn't like. So it's not something that a couple of countries can say we don't like this. And that's very important because the whole philosophy here is we're working on harmonized measures on the internal market. Now, I'll just say I'm conscious I'm 4 minutes beyond the time that was allocated in the agenda, but I also started a couple of
No
minutes.
worry. Matthias, please go ahead. Your presentation is really crucial for our members. Please go ahead.
Okay, I think I will not be longer than 6 minutes, but I think this part is it's quite important, and especially what I'm going to say now. So you, through associations, or if you're directly involved, or through any other forums that you work with, maybe in your country, you have a Chamber of Commerce following this, and you're active there, you will know if your product is in the working program when we're consulting on it and when it's adopted. So that means first, sort of yellow light, you know, you will be regulated at one point. Then you will, I'll explain a bit later as well. We have a website where everything will be published, and we intend to work through Eco Design Forum in a very structured way to make sure all the actors are up to date and they find ways of being involved in this process. So through 2 or 3 years of preparation of the measure, there will be several entry points where you're giving either evidence or feedback on what are we considering to do. Then another point will be an Eco Design Forum. And once the measure is adopted, almost none of the requirements will become applicable on the same day. So let's say you're working in apparel and textiles. Let's say our delegated act is adopted at the end of 2025, which is the earliest possible. There will be still minimum 18 months. This is a legal requirement we have in the regulation. There will be 18 months before any of the measures become applicable, with sort of very few exceptions that have to really be duly justified. So that's basically the starting point when you have to comply with the requirements, and where products, when they're placed on the market, have to comply with the requirements. Often, at least sometimes, it's already practiced now, some of the requirements would come in later. There would be so-called staggered approach. So let's say one category of requirements kicks in 18 months, but there could be some technical adjustments that need more time. That also impact assessment demonstrates that the companies need more time. We have to take into account how average stocking in the sector works. So all these things will be looked at in our analysis, and could then lead to additional time for implementation. At the same time, we, of course, want to be sure we are getting the right level of ambition. Just to be clear, the point is not in delaying unnecessarily. The point is to have evidence-based decision making, so that we are really trying to push for improvements, but we're doing it in a way that is feasible and that is proportionate. So just to be clear, the message is not nothing will happen. The message is we'll work hard with you to make things happen, but we'll do it in a way that's proportionate. We can move on to the next slide. So unfortunately, this one doesn't work the way we would like to, because you probably have to really work hard to see what's there. But I'll just explain. We had, even through the preparation of our regulation, we understood that there's strong need of both the stakeholders and also legislators to understand what we have in mind. So we worked in parallel to our negotiations with our colleagues in Joint Research Center, which is part of the Commission, to identify what are the likeliest candidates and to be regulated, and to also come up with some robust enough methodology or approach, rather, to allow us to do this. And again, all this is publicly available. We consulted and we have a feedback on this, which was sort of, on one hand, largely confirming that the approach is right, and on the other hand, gave us very useful ranking on how different categories of stakeholders see what is the priority. I can say that, for example, among the products, textiles and furnitures came out very high. They from all kinds of stakeholders, they come out the highest. We also got feedback on the intermediate products, where iron and steel, but also aluminium, non-ferrous metals came up quite high in analysis and in the feedback. And maybe just to point out one thing, we don't legally look in what's called strategic autonomy, because we need to be consistent with our international trading obligations, but we do want to understand, in terms of priorities, how regulation of products and sort of increase of circularity could also affect Europe's sort of resilience. And that's why in the yellow sort of line, you will see that we also looked at the aspect of how improvements in these products could affect what we call Europe's strategic autonomy. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm coming to another very important part, which is that the consultation and interaction with the industry will be done in a structured way, as it is done today for energy-related products. The Eco Design Forum will basically provide feedback on all steps, both the strategic planning and the work on the products themselves, including aspects of the prohibition of the destruction of goods. We are at the moment considering what would be the best structure and organization. We're consulting in targeted ways. Also, those who are involved in current eco design. Just 2 days ago, my colleagues were discussing this in current eco design consultation forum. But what is clear also legally, so the category of organizations that would be in would be representatives of all kinds of civil society, but also researchers, standardization organizations, and obviously, very importantly, industry representatives. And we just have to find the right balance between our wish to be as open as possible and to share documents and everything in as broad as possible way, and then on the other hand to have effective representation so that the meetings themselves can actually be operational. So this is what we're working on. But for example, I would assume that some of you who are listening who work in companies or in associations, if you don't have capacity yourself, because you're not a massive company that works directly with the association, you will have several entry points depending either your chamber of commerce or Orgalim or your sector or association. So that would be what I think where you would be looking at. And we will be coming out with our proposals in likely after the summer, which will be then accompanied also with a call for membership. Which will, at the moment, our considerations are to have this open, which means that we don't call one time and then forget about it and just work with people who applied, but keep the option open if along as we progress working on different products, there is need to have additional members, that this can be done in a relatively flexible way. And we expect the first meeting of the forum to take place still before the end of this year. But this is our planning at the moment. This has to be verified against the passage of the legal milestones. If we can move on to the next slide. Just to mention in few words, there is currently a consultation forum, which is well established, that will continue working on some of the work that is already ongoing on the energy related products. And this will be still very active until the end of 2026, where they'll be still setting requirements according to the current Eco Design Directive. And then this will move on progressively towards all the work being done just in the Eco Design Forum that I just described. If we can move on, please. That was my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for your very interesting presentation. I was particularly pleased to hear that the Commission plans to take a careful approach on horizontal measures. Second point, that level playing field is very important. Indeed, industry fully agrees with you. This is really very important for companies. And third point, which is a key takeaway from me, is that it's important to have, of course, evidence-based decision making and proportionate requirements. This sounds like music to the ears of Orgalim members. You will hear it later on in the presentation from Orgalim members. Thanks a lot, Matthias, for your presentation. I will now pass the floor to Michele Galatola, who is Senior Policy Officer in DG GROW and Chair of the Commission Cross-DG Working Group on the Digital Product Passport. Michele will zoom in on the Digital Product Passport. And like for Matthias, I would like also to very warmly thank Michele for his excellent cross-DG coordination he's doing on Digital Product Passport. Orgalim is very lucky because we already had the pleasure and honor to have Michele speaking at many Orgalim Policy Exchanges webinar we organized in the past and meetings with our members on the Digital Product Passport. Michele, thank you very much for the excellent cooperation with Orgalim since several years. You will soon get a special medal from Orgalim. Let's not hear what the Digital Product Passport is about. Dear Michele, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good morning to everybody who is following online. As mentioned, my name is Michele Galatola. I work in DG GROW, and I have the honor of being the coordinator of the informal working group that the Commission established on the Digital Product Passport. Next slide, please. As already mentioned by Matthias, the ESPR is really a collective exercise, and the DPP this is even more evident because not only they are the three lead DGs for the ESPR, so ENV, ENER, and GROW, but since the very first day we have been working very closely on a daily basis with colleagues from DG Connect, DG Digit, DG JRC, DG TaxSud. And this is important to be kept in mind because, as I will explain, the DPP is not only a tool that has been introduced for ESPR, but is part of a wider strategy of the Commission to progressively digitalize our economy and our policies, of course, always keeping in mind the green component of that work. Another thing that is important to keep in mind to understand how we are designing the DPP is that the DPP will support, as is part of the SPR, will support sustainability and circularity, but it will also play an important role with reference to legal compliance. It is also important for clarity to keep in mind that it is not as such a track and tracing tool, even if the way how we are designing it will allow, when relevant and appropriate, to also provide information related to things that happens along the supply chain. So it can be used for track and tracing, but it's not designed to be a track and tracing tool. As mentioned, it is not just about ESPR. The DPP is already ingrained in other legislations like the batteries regulation. It is part of the toys and the detergents regulation. These are still under trilogues or negotiation, but it's something that has not been questioned by the co-legislator, so we are sure it will remain. It is related also to the construction products regulation that we use also the DPP system. It is also included in the in the Green Claims Directive, which is currently again under negotiations. And elements of the DPP are also referenced in the Critical Raw Material Act and also in the most recent regulation on packaging and packaging waste. Next slide, please. So a few main elements of the design feature of the DPP. The most important, the one that really differentiates the DPP from anything else that has been done in the past by the Commission, is that it is a decentralized system when it comes to data storage. So the data will remain with the companies that are producing those data, will not be stored centrally by the Commission. The DPP will be linked to a product or an intermediate material or a component, which is something to keep in mind. For example, when it comes to how the DPP will be designed for a complex product where you have both the final product and a component having a DPP, then the idea is to link these two DPP in the final product. Access to information will take place through a product unique identifier. So every product or component will have its unique identifier. This information will be embedded in a data carrier, like a QR code, an NFC, an RFID. I mean, there are many possibilities available. And then there will be a lookup mechanism, which basically is how you will get from scanning the information on the data carrier to where the information is available in terms of DPP content. The DPP will contain both public information but also restricted, trace-sensitive, IPR protected information. For these reasons, access to the information will happen on a need-to-know basis, and it will be implemented through a system rights access management system, probably attribute-based. In terms of granularity, there will be three possibilities. The DPP might be requested at model level, so the highest granularity possible, at batch level, or at item level. When we will require each level of granularity, it will depend from product group to product group. So this will be a product group specific decision. For example, going to the item level makes sense, especially for those product groups that have a higher added value, and for those product groups for which circularity is very relevant. So where we need to have information on repairing activities, refurbishment activities, then in that case, makes sense to go to the item level. Otherwise, staying at the batch level might work very well, probably in the majority of cases. Next slide, please. You can click because there are some, yeah. Okay, another click, stop there. No, okay, perfect. In terms of terminology, it's important that you start to get used to differentiate between the DPP system and the DPP data. The DPP system is basically everything that happens in the background, everything that you will never see as a user. So it's the system of protocols and standards that will be necessary to make the DPP working, implementable, and interoperable. And there is also the DPP registry and the web portal that I will explain afterwards. All these things, again, you will never see them as a user and will rely on a set of harmonized standards that are under development. I will get back to that in the next slide. But now, so this is the DPP system, and this will be standardized. Then we have the DPP data. The DPP data is the information that you will find in your passport, and that the information will be product group specific. So the passport for textiles, for example, may include different information from the passport on furniture or steel or aluminium or you name it. The information to be included in the passport will be defined in the delegated act when it is a product regulated through ESPR or in the specific product legislation, like, for example, it happened for batteries. So this information will not be subject to a standardization request. It will not go through standardization, but it will go through the normal legislative process. So the Commission will do preparatory studies, identify possible requirements in terms of data to be included in the passport, and then we will consult all the stakeholders, and everything will be also set from an impact assessment perspective. As I mentioned at the beginning, what kind of information you may find there? Technical performance, sustainability-related information, circularity-related information, legal compliance, like, for example, declaration of conformity, and other information like existence of labels, of manual availability of spare parts. So it will, again, it will be an important and rich tool, but we will focus on what is really relevant. So the idea from the Commission perspective is not to dump every possible information in the DPP, but we will try to make available in the DPP what is really relevant from a sustainability, circularity, and legal compliance perspective. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we are working with CEN and CENELEC to develop a set of harmonized standards for the DPP system, so the background office. The work has already started. Just a couple of days ago, there was the meeting of the Joint Technical Committee 24, which is the committee that has been created by CEN and CENELEC to do the work on this set of standards. There are 8 areas that will be standardized. They are listed here. And basically, this is everything that you need to have then DPPs that are really operational and interoperable, which is one of the key terms, a key functionality for us. Next slide, please. Staying still on the standardization, there are a few things that I want to remind because these are really important. I already mentioned the JTC 24. A very important thing is that we shall not reinvent the wheel. I mean, element of passports are already existing in Europe and worldwide. Barcode, QR code, and code used in Industry 4.0, they are standards already there. So basically, we want to start from the existing mature standard at international level and complement them with new approaches that have been developed in the recent years, because we think that it's not necessary to pick and choose one solution, but there are different solutions that can coexist and be made interoperable. And this will be the main task for the CEN/CENELEC JTC 24, to bring together different realities and make them work together. Of course, the standards should reflect state of the art and they will be technology neutral to the maximum extent possible. Then there are technicalities that are really important, like the persistency of the identifiers, the level of security, and for example, one thing that is very important is to make sure that we create a system that is limiting the possibility for fraud to happen and from tampering of information to happen. And then the last thing, as I mentioned already before, the data themselves will not be developed by JTC 24, but for example, the ontology of the sector, the dictionaries of the sectors that will be developed in the delegated act, but they will work on the horizontal ontologies. Next slide, please. What are the requirements for companies when it comes to the DPP? They will have to create the passport, and I'm talking about the economic operator placing the product on the market. That, from an NLF perspective, means either the manufacturer or the importer. So they will have to create a passport to make sure that the passport is complete, so that all the information required by the legislation or the delegated act is included in the passport. And they were also responsible to be sure that the information is authentic, reliable, and verified. Moreover, there will be an obligation for each economic operator to make available a backup copy of the DPP that will be stored by a third-party product passport service providers. This is necessary for several reasons. The most important is to guarantee access to the passport information also many years from now on, when maybe the company doesn't exist anymore, they have left the market, or there are other reasons why the original company cannot provide any more access to the passport. Then we need to have the possibility to have access to a backup copy. And then the information included in the passport will also be available when you do online shopping. So before you really buy a product, before even having the product in your hand, you will find also the same information in online in passport that will be available there. Next slide, please. Now, very shortly, because I think I'm hitting too much of the time I was given, the DPP is not just a regulatory tool, but the DPP, we are fully convinced, we are actually sure that is a powerful tool for business to create new business, to develop their business even more. The simple fact that only in Europe there are already about 100 DPP existing or in the making, and Caroline may be more precise on that number, confirms that the business interest is there. There are important business case for developing the DPP. In the 2 slides that you will see now, I try to identify the keywords that will apply in why the DPP will bring benefits to companies that will be higher than the costs that it will entail. So it's about a streamlined data management, because the DPP will require exchange of information along the entire supply chain, but it will facilitate this information because the way how information should be provided will be standardized, and there will be work on data exchange formats protocol. So it will be easier for company to provide the data required, not only in the context of the implementation of DPP, but also in the context, for example, of other of providing compliance to other policies. So this will lead also to a higher supply chain efficiency. It will lead to sustainable business practice, because we think that we will create through these new markets related to, for example, to repair and to remanufacturing of products. And if we move to the next slide, we will see that there are other advantages that we are seeing appearing in the market. Too fast. Previous, please. Previous slides. Thank you. Here. So I was talking about the new business opportunities, new revenues of streams. We think that in particularly there will be data-driven markets that will be strengthened through the existence of the DPP. It will be easier for company to prove regulatory compliance, and this will directly and indirectly increase the brand value for them. And then, of course, there is a competitive advantage, because there will be also a way of having access to incentives and maybe preferential fundings for all those companies that will improve their highest performances also through the use of the DPP. So now if we move to the next slide, which is one of the last we have, this is just to mention that while the system is decentralized from a storage perspective, there is a little tiny centralization component that is the so-called DPP registry. The DPP registry will not store information included in the passport, so not the real data or not even the confidential data. It will only store the things that you see there in the slide. So the 3 identifiers that will always be required for each product, and then a commodity code and the reference to the backup. So why do we need the registry? Because through the registry, we will link it to the IT system of all the custom authorities in Europe. And this will allow us to move from a risk-based approach to a 100% checks for all the products imported, regulated of the products that will have a DPP. So authorities will be able to have a 100% automatic checks on the existence and authenticity of the passports. This is really a big improvement. And then through the registry, we will also operationalize the web portal, which is a novelty that has been introduced towards the end of the negotiation by the Council and the Parliament, where basically the Commission is asked to design and then maintain a web portal that will allow all stakeholders, depending on their access rights, to search for information included in the passport and compare information included in the passport, even without having access to the passport itself. And this is a very important way of gathering information. It is also very helpful for policymakers, because we allow also to have a kind of live monitoring of the performances of the products that we are regulating. Next slide, please. I think we are now towards the end. So the work ahead, as Matthias was mentioning, there are a lot of things that need to be done before the DPP becomes operational. Among those things, we have to develop a very sound and working governance system. And this is what we are starting to do now. There will be 3 secondary legislation on the topics that you just see. So we will establish rules and procedure on how the DPP service providers will have to work, rules and procedures related to how we will manage digital credentials and verifiable credentials that will become very important in the context of these new digital tools, and also rules and procedure related to how the life cycle of identifiers and data carriers will have to be managed, either through issuing agency or through the so-called self-minted approach. Next slide, please. The timeline that we have ahead is that all this work about harmonization of standards and the governance, we are planning to have it finalized by end of 2025, because then we want to devote 2026 to put in place a number of supporting activities to help SMEs, companies, member states, market surveillance authorities to get familiar with all these technicalities behind the DPP, so that when the first DPP will become mandatory, and this will be the 18th of February 2027 for batteries, all the different actors will be ready to implement the system. Then the other DPPs, the ones for the ESPR and the other legislation that I mentioned before, will enter into force as Matthias explained, depending on when the delegated acts will be adopted and then the 18 months of the transition time. So at the earliest, as Matthias was saying, for textile, for example, if we adopt the delegated act in end of 2025, that means that in the second half of 2027, the DPP will become mandatory. And from what I hear from other colleagues dealing with the other legislations, also for them, 2027 will, the second part of 2027 or early 28 will be the time when their DPPs will become mandatory. So this 2027 will be really a very important year for the European DPP. And I think that was my last slide. Let's check if there's anything else after. Oh, yes, there is. I was forgetting the big event that we as a commission are organizing on DPP. I mean, there will be several actions, but one that I am particularly eager to present to you is this one day, full day deep dive webinar on the DPP state of play and work ahead. It will take place on the 11th of June, 2024. As you see, it's a full day. In the coming weeks, we will make available in the ESPR website all the information about how to register. We will also distribute through always through the website discussion papers prepared by the Commission services presenting the different topics that will be discussed with options, with scenarios, and with questions for you stakeholders to come back to us with your feedback. The final agenda is still under shaping, let's say, but we have identified at least 6 issues that we will discuss more in details, probably through panels with both representative of the Commission and external invited panelists. So I'm really eager to see you all there on the 11th of June. And I think with this one, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michele, for your very interesting presentation. Of course, you can count on Orgalim Secretariat and members to attend your upcoming webinar on the 11th of June, and we will work hard to provide you good input for your webinar. Thank you, Michele. Without further ado, I will now give the floor to my dear colleagues Luis and Ulrike to present you the views from Orgalim and recommendation. Luis Bühnemann is the chair of Orgalim Green Transition Working Group and head of the EU Environmental Policy at the Confederation of Danish Industries, and we will then hear from Ulrike Witz, who is the vice chair of Orgalim Green Transition Working Group and expert on environmental policy at the Association of Metal Technology Industries in Austria. Orgalim is extremely lucky to have such an active leadership of our Orgalim Green Transition Working Group. Thank you so much, Luis and Ulrike. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you to the former speakers. Orgalim really welcomes the ESPR. We see these product and information requirements as steps towards a more circular economy in the EU. And to us, circularity and the single market are the two key aspects of this regulation. And we think that the regulation will work because, first of all, the eco-design instrument, it's shown itself to work under the eco-design directive. And we believe that being science-based and using thorough impact assessments, as Matthias described it, really is what makes this tool a great tool to make a difference on the circularity. And then second of all, I think we trust the harmonized EU requirements that are, when they are feasible, to implement in real life for companies, also small companies. Scale is very important for companies that want to be more circular, and scale means single market. Scale means a level playing field. Therefore, strong market surveillance and effective enforcement across EU is key. And again, I applaud Matthias for underlining this also in his presentation. And then third of all, I think in modesty, we from industry side, we can really contribute to the development of these requirements so they can work in real life. We can deliver the information about what works in the production process. Therefore, it's very crucial that we're involved, and we will definitely be signing up for the Eco-Design Forum. On the digital part of the regulation, we see a lot of the benefits also described by Michele. To us, the preservation of confidential business data is, of course, important. We strongly support the decentralized system that the Commission describes, and we would like to add also our recommendation to maybe use a more flexible approach so that not only see the DPP as a tool for different regulations, but also something that companies may add their own data to. And then we support the ambition for data in the DPP to be interoperable and to, when possible, of course, rely on existing databases and existing established industry solutions. In other words, companies should only deliver data once. And then lastly, I'll mention green public procurement, because we believe that the public sector really has an important role to play to create this drive towards more circular products, and they can do that through their procurement. Over to my colleague Ulrike.
Yeah, although we generally welcome the ESPR, here's what concerns us. The lack of enforcement and the market surveillance activities undermine the level playing field in the EU, so fair competition needs really to be assured. We are also concerned by disproportionality. The costs for industry for costly data gathering or processing or third-party verification might outweigh the gains for the environment and potentially impact industry's competitiveness on the global market. Policymakers need especially to be careful when setting performance requirements for components. We call for redundancy. The duplication of efforts and double regulation, in particular for chemicals, creates unnecessary administrative burden and legal uncertainty. The policy coherence across different fields should be ensured, and the different legal instruments, for example, REACH, Ecodesign, and Waste Framework Directive, should be used according to their intended goals. And especially product policy regarding circularity should not regulate safety of chemicals. Talking about chemicals, substances of concern. The definition includes thousands of new substances based on unclear criteria and an extensive scope, which will lead to legal ambiguities and excessive administrative burden, especially for SMEs. The requirements should be only justified in the context and scope of the ESPR and must be relevant for circularity. We are also concerned about confidentiality in the connection with the data in the scope of the DPP. The protection of confidential business data needs to be preserved, and the interplay with other legislation must be ensured. And we are also a bit uneasy with data overreach. From a company's perspective, the required data might not be of added value, and the content of the DPP not focusing on essential data which are available within complex global value chains. As a DPP is a completely new task for enterprises, we suggest to start small and make it work. And there are a lot of questions in connection with horizontal requirements. These require early warning and clear-cut description of scope for companies, and especially for SMEs to be able to implement in time. Bearing in mind that in many SMEs, there is not even a team of 2 responsible for environmental compliance topics. Any new requirements must also consider trade-offs. However, we prefer a product-by-product approach. And methodological uncertainty will create burden. Life cycle assessment methods and requirements, especially when working across sectors and materials, need to be aligned across and with already existing approaches. There's also uncertainty about how the durability and repairability scores will work in practice. Back to Lise.
Thank you. So it's really very basic what we're asking for. Requirements should in fact make products more circular, and data should in fact have added value. And I think what Ulrike said is our general recommendation: start small and make it work. Because especially when it comes to the DPP, this is something new. It's new for authorities, it's new for companies, and we need some time to figure it out. We see that later, if need be, something can be added, but let's start small and make it work and make it a success from the beginning. And then, as already mentioned, clear timelines and clear scope I thank both the Commission speakers for their presentation of timelines and scope. I think horizontal requirements is some of what creates uncertainty about these, because companies worry that they can no longer just look up in the work plan and see if their product is covered, but they might be covered by horizontal requirements. So I'm also very glad to hear that the Commission will proceed carefully on that front. On the more technical recommendations, we suggest to follow the new legislative framework approach. That means setting the essential requirements in the legal text and then specifying and giving the technical solutions via standardization. Simply put, we think that's the best way to set requirements that are in fact enforceable by market surveillance authorities. We think that requirements should be technology neutral. Companies should be allowed to innovate and figure out new solutions and not be hampered by specific technologies in the legislation. And then, as my colleague said, we are a strong proponent of product by product requirements. There are a lot of products out there, and we know that this approach will mean a lot of delegated acts, but we accept that. We think that's the best way to accommodate specific product characteristics. And for the same reason, we worry that we recommend that horizontal requirements will be used only as a last resort. And then finally, consistency and no overlap is important. I think that all of us that have been working on products and green legislations for the last few years feel that we've been through some kind of tsunami. What's kept us standing is knowing that each and every piece of legislation does what it's meant to do and not duplicate other legislation. But right now we feel that a lot of companies are uncertain. One example I heard about is for local space heaters. Space heaters are considered a construction product, so it would be under the construction products regulation, but it's also an energy related product. So could it also be eco-design? And for these cases where there seemingly is some kind of overlap, we would really welcome a guidance from the Commission. And then back to Ulrike.
Yeah, and a few other points that are important for successful implementation. The scope of the ESPR delegated acts should be limited to the product properties that are the most decisive to the environmental performance of a product or a product group. At the moment, companies are puzzled as to how to deal with intermediate products like steel, iron, or aluminium. There's a lot of uncertainty and a strong demand from our industries for the Commission to clearly state how regulating intermediate products will work in practice under the ESPR and what kind of obligations the different stakeholders and actors would have with regard to the DPP. Please make sure that the economic operators will be provided with sufficient time to prepare for the implementation of new ESPR requirements to ensure legal certainty and predictability, and take into account that for a successful design and implementation of the delegated acts, industry should be involved as soon as possible in the process, because industry's input will be vital for the success of the ESPR. In terms of credibility, a balance needs to be found between risks of non-compliance and or greenwashing and proportionate verification costs. Third-party verification should be used only if the nature, the type, and the degree of the risks entailed to the product are justifying it. We recommend conformity assessments to be carried out exclusively by the manufacturer and without the involvement of a third-party body for the majority of the products to be covered by the ESPR delegated acts. Third-party verification should not be considered a solution for a stronger market surveillance, as identifying non-compliance is not only a public authority competence, but also an entirely different type of activity. In addition, the availability of third-party verifiers shall also be considered. Already today, there is a shortage of verifiers, for example, for third-party verification of environmental product declarations. And last but not least, I would like to come back to the substances of concern. The implementation should be done case by case to ensure regulations support effective circularity without imposing unnecessary restrictions. When assessing the delegated acts, a threshold approach would ensure a more effective and accurate framing for the SOX. Thanks a lot. Back to Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Louise and Ulrike. Thank you, thank you. Without further ado, I will now pass the floor to Caroline Bernier, who is the CIRPAS Consortium Coordinator. Caroline is Senior Research Engineer in Smart Embedded Perception Systems, and she will present us the results of the EU-funded CIRPAS. Dear Caroline, the floor is yours, and due to time constraint, because we took a bit of delay, if you could at the end of your presentation also mention a few words about CIRPAS 2, that would be very interesting. Thank you, Caroline. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. So as Stephanie said, I'm the coordinator of the CIRPAS project. Next slide, please. Just a brief introduction of my company, CEA. So CEA is a French public research institute, and we develop technologies for industry, and our mission is the transfer of technology to industry. Personally, I am from the Digital Institute of CEA, which is the one on the bottom and on the right. So we are a very large institute, but I'm physically located in Grenoble. Next slide, please. So as Stephanie said, I am coordinating the CIRPAS consortium. So we are a consortium of 31 partners with a very wide and diverse skill set. And our mission is to build consensus on the architecture of a standards-based DPP system. So while we do focus on 3 product categories, so textiles, batteries, and electronics, our main mission is to build and advise the European Commission on the construction of the architecture of the IT part of the DPP system. So over the 18 months that the project has run, we have built a large number of partnerships because, of course, with the European Commission, but with many, many other actors, because this is a very interdisciplinary field, the DPP, and so we need to gather input from a wide range of actors. And we have also built a very large stakeholder community because there is a very important interest in the topic. And we try, since we are focusing on the IT architecture of the DPP, that we try to have a cross-sectoral approach. And so we have gathered interest from many sectors, as you can see at the bottom. Next slide, please. So we are funded by the European Commission under the Digital Europe program. The project is finishing in March 2024. We ran for 18 months, and we are officially a coordination and support action of the European Commission. So this means that our role is to coordinate the stakeholder community and also support the Commission, but also all of the DPP stakeholders. And we strive to be a neutral and objective source of information. Next slide, please. So what is it exactly the problem that we're trying to solve in CIRPAS? So the problem is, how can all industrial sectors agree on a common DPP system that is compliant to the requirements of the ESPR and the battery regulation, and that is capable and mature enough to support the massive issuing of DPPs as of 2027, which is when the first mandatory DPPs will come into effect. So at the bottom, at the bottom, you can see a figure of a supply chain. And what is very important to state, as Michele presented earlier, is that the DPP is not a traceability solution. So it's not meant to trace information along supply chains. The DPP begins its life when a responsible economic operator places a product on the market. And its use is meant to be more downstream in order to facilitate circular economy operations in B2B context, but also B2C information provision, and also B2G, of course. So the main focus of CIRPAS is, of course, ensuring regulatory compliance as of 2027 for a large number of industries. But compliance is one thing, but in Surpass, we also believe that the DPP should have some role beyond compliance. And this, on the next slide, I will explain this a little bit further. So in Surpass, we have a vision that the DPP links the EU internal market to the data economy. And we believe that the DPP is an incredible opportunity because we have a small regulatory core which will require standardized data exchange protocols. And this is what is lacking today to build a data economy, because there are many data sharing schemes out there, but they are not standardized and they are not interoperable. Okay, so we have this small, if you go to the next slide, so we have this small regulatory core, but once you have this, you can enable a much wider a much wider number of possibilities. We can connect the DPP to existing or future data spaces. We can connect to Green Deal data space data. We can reuse a large number of existing data catalogs and dictionaries. We can explore how the DPP can connect to advanced digital services such as distributed ledgers, verified credentials, distributed identifiers, digital twins, etc. So I won't go into detail of what that could imply for the European industry. But the message here is that the DPP is a small, I agree with what was said previously, we should start small and then build forward, but the DPP system has to be designed in such a way that we can both ensure the small mandatory regulatory part, but also enable all the rest. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So here we in Surpass we try to build requirements for the DPP system that focus both on regulatory compliance and beyond regulatory usage to enable this data market. So Michele already described a number of regulatory requirements for the DPP system. But if we look at more on the business requirements for this data economy, we have a number of additional requirements that were not stated by Michele. We have a requirement around acceptability. So in order to facilitate acceptability of the DPP system, we have to make sure that it enables the maximum reuse of legacy IT systems and legacy data sharing systems. And we also want to build the system in such a way that we can accommodate both regulatory compliance for the information requirements, but additional and evolving and time evolving information requirements. That can be, for example, shared with specific business partners when there are specific business agreements to share this data. And we need something that is future-proof and that will evolve easily in time. Because if we build and deploy a DPP system now, then it will be around for dozens and dozens of years. So that means flexibility has to be built into the system. But we also need to use mature technologies in order to ensure that the DPP can be deployed in 2027. So luckily, we have these technologies that exist today. So everyone is familiar with web technology that we use, all of us, every single day. But you may not be so familiar with the semantic web technologies, which also have existed from practically as long as the web exists, and that rather than sharing links to HTML pages, which is what the web does, semantic web links data and metadata, so data about data. And so this technology is widely deployed today, even if many people have never heard about it, and it's widely used in industry today. And so this is what we propose to use as the basis for the DPP system. Next slide, please. Right, so Stephanie asked me to share with you some of the results from Surpass as we are ending in March of 2024, right here. So on our webpage, surpass.eu, if you go to the project results, you can already download a number of our reports. So here, for example, we've published a first version of our roadmaps, a study on how the DPP might impact SMEs, a very important report on identification schemes, and also we have published a very important very large benchmark study of existing DPP-related solutions. And we have updated the annex 8 times because we keep being asked by stakeholders to add their solution in the report. And as Surpass is ending, very soon we will be publishing our DPP system architecture proposal, our DPP user stories proposal, which are the requirements for the DPP system, report on DPP use cases, and our recommendations. Next slide, please. And you may also find useful the replays and slides that are available online on our website as well of the final event that we held 2 weeks ago. And it was a full day event. There were 35 speakers from 3 different projects, and everything is available on our website. And hopefully you will find a presentation that hopefully will answer the questions that you have for the moment on the DPP. I believe that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Caroline. This was very interesting. And CIRPAS will continue with the CIRPAS 2 project. Orgalim will also engage in that. But in one word, in a few, could you please tell us a bit more about CIRPAS 2 project, please, Caroline?
Yes, sorry, I forgot.
No
Surpass 2 is another project that will be funded by the European Commission under the Digital Europe program. It should start in May 24. It will run for 3 years. And so this is an innovation action, and the focus is on the wide-scale and at-scale deployment of DPPs. We are looking at 4 different sectors: textiles, electronic products, tires, and construction products. And there are 13 pilot ecosystems within the Surpass 2 project. And in parallel to this, we hope to expand on our stakeholder community because there is a huge need to share know-how, open source code, results from pilots, use cases, examples of use cases of the DPP, etc. So this is a very important aspect as well.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, thank you. Without further ado, let's move very quickly to the last part of our webinar. Due to time constraints, I will ask only one question to one speaker, who will be Matthias. Matthias, please. So one question only to you due to time constraint. We received many questions ahead of the webinar related to the implementation of ESPR, and we would be very happy to hear what are your recommendations to companies, to the many companies attending our webinar today, to get ready for future ESPR requirements. Is the Commission, for example, planning to do any activities such as, for example, issuing guidelines to support companies to comply with this new ESPR requirement, and how could companies monitor the Commission activities when you are enlarging the scope of the ESPR? Thank you, Matthias. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for this privilege. I just wanted to say it was super interesting to hear the others and your recommendations, and also I learned about new things about data linked to metadata. So thanks for that. Now, so I sent to organizers just now a couple of websites that will have updates on our work. So I hope Stephanie can get that somehow to people who are listening. But I would say the following few things. As far as the Commission is concerned, hopefully you have seen that we've already thought ahead and started working on a number of things, such as SIRPA, such as working on a work program already as we are negotiating this. So this is all already as we were preparing the proposal and negotiating it, because we want to be sure that we're very transparent and that people and companies know what we're doing. So we'll continue to do so. And the main areas, so first I can announce we're going to have a webinar that will present what is the regulation after the negotiations. It's going to be broken down in several categories. This will be on 22nd of May. As I said, I sent a website on which you can find further data on this to Stephanie just now. We will probably, if needed, have such events in the future. The main channel of being sure that you know what's going on would probably be working through your associations and eventually being members of the Eco Design Forum, which will really be then a structured way in which we are sharing all the information. We'll probably have special web spaces where you can navigate and so on. So keeping companies informed is going to be very important. But of course, not everything is information. So my second point is we understand that there will be a need potentially for specific guidance, and our regulation itself foresees, for example, when we're developing requirements, we have to take special account of the needs of SMEs. We have to develop or help develop digital tools. So, for example, if there will be life cycle assessment requirement, we will help with this to be available so companies don't have to pay too much. If guidelines will be needed, there is an obligation for us to provide them. So we'll really already in our assessment, we'll be thinking about how and consulting you on how can we really make sure that it is effective, implementable, that it doesn't present an unnecessary problem, but it presents a well-guided transition. So these are some of the things we'll be doing on our side. There's also there's going to be structured discussion, especially for SMEs. We have certain obligations. There's a lot of discussion about the need to make sure that their transition is facilitated. So we'll be also working with their representative organizations. There will be programs, etc. The third point is, of course, we don't pretend that our regulation is the only game in town. We know it's very important, but as your colleagues already presented before, companies themselves are working on this, on more circular products, on sustainability, and regulation we see as one of the pillars around which we can help this transition. But we also want to help with softer measures. So there is an initiative which is part of our work that's called the Circular Business Hub that we're developing now. It was also announced in the communication that was adopted at the same time as regulation, and we will hopefully soon launch some pilot projects similar to how SearPass was for the digital product passport. So that will be yet another avenue for those who are more at the forefront of activities already to engage. So I think these, in short, are what we intend to do, but we always welcome also your suggestions how we can do things better. So if you get feedback, thank you for the website, but it doesn't tell us anything, pass it on to us. I mean, we're in public service, so our job is not to hide things, but to make them available, to have a robust discussion on how you see what we're doing. I'm also responding to all your recommendations from before. So this in a nutshell, because it's already 1 minute past 12. And thanks again to everybody for being here today.
Thank you very much, Matthias. This was very interesting. So sorry for the few minutes delay, but we thought it's really important to hear the concluding remarks and recommendations from Matthias. All speakers, please put your camera on. So thank you very, very much to all the speakers for their very interesting presentations and for the enriching policy exchange we had today. We have now reached the end of our webinar. I believe our speakers have addressed in their presentations most of the questions you sent us ahead of our event and questions you had in mind. Thanks a million again to all the speakers. As mentioned at the start of the event, you will receive early next week an email with the links to access the recording of the event, the presentations, and Matthias, we will make sure that the links you just sent me before will be included, as well as the Orgalim views and recommendations. If you want to receive news from our industries and latest policies, please don't hesitate to subscribe to Orgalim newsletter. You will be very welcome. The next Orgalim Policy Exchange webinar will be on PFAS-free solutions, the challenge ahead, and it will take place on the 15th of May. Please save the date. In the email you will receive next week with the material from today's policy exchange, you will also find a link to register to our next policy exchange on PFAS. Once again, thank you very much to all the speakers, and of course, thank you very much to you all the many participants. I heard we were close to 600 participants today for attending our event. We hope you found our policy exchange useful. My best wishes to you all for a happy spring. The Orgalim Policy Exchange is now over. Goodbye.
Goodbye.